You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. Welcome back to another edition of Inside Automotive right here at CBT Automotive Network. We're now in the final stretch for 2024 and the automotive industry continues to face a number of significant shifts and challenges, from the port strikes to the latest news around Stellantis and Volkswagen. There's a lot to unpack. Here to help us break it all down and to give us what's ahead for the buy-sell market, as well as Ryan Kerrigan, Managing Director of Kerrigan Advisors. You've seen him here before on CBT News. So Ryan, thanks so much for taking the time out of your schedule to join us.
Of course, Jim, good to see you.
Sure. So from a macro industry perspective, how is the automotive market faring right now?
Yeah, we're slogging through. We aren't seeing a lot of underlying growth, but it remains a robust industry. Cox just came out with their most recent report. September was down quite a bit, but that was more driven by selling days than it was by SAR. So, we're going to probably continue in this kind of mid 15 million SAR here in the U.S. Again, it's a tougher environment. We're not seeing the growth vectors, but by the same token, profitability, generally speaking, remains pretty strong. So we're in a good spot. Not ideal, but we're in a good spot.
Yeah, not what it was 3 years ago, but things are good, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
From your perspective and from what you hear, are they still better than 2019? Because 2019 was still a pretty decent year, but.
Yeah. Generally speaking, the industry's in a better place than it was pre-COVID. So that's exactly the year to look at. The COVID sort of experience started playing out for us in March and April of 2020. So 2019 was that last pure kind of pre-COVID experience.
Right.
And there's no question that there are exceptions. We can talk about some of that today.
Sure.
But industry levels, sort of operational metrics, financial metrics for most groups are substantially better. On top of that, many groups are just frankly sitting on bigger organizations, higher revenue dealerships, and more cash on their balance sheet because of that COVID era. So even as we're kind of gliding back a little bit towards the new normal, dealers are just in a much better position today for the most part than they were in 2019. So
good.
Absolutely.
Good. That's great. So the Fed lowered interest rates recently, and that made a big ripple out there. Has it begun to impact the marketplace?
Ever so slightly, but these things take a while. Just we saw the big hikes in 2022. It took a couple of years for those to fully work through the system. And it'll be the same on the reverse, but clearly 50 basis points just in the last 2 weeks. The consensus is probably another 25 basis point in November, and the consensus is for another 25 basis points in December.
Wow. That
will start to ripple through, and as you well know, having been in this industry for a long time, the consumers are financing the cars. We have debt on the real estate, and then flooring, of course. So those things really start to ripple through, and it's a good positive piece of inertia for the industry right now. A little too early to see it.
So as we enter the fourth quarter of 2024, what's on the horizon for the car industry? I mean, we're talking about port strikes. What's that gonna?
That's the one that I was going to jump on here. This thing snuck up on a lot of folks. There was a little bit of discussion of it. I don't think it was considered likely to happen, and here we are. You've got 45,000 longshoremen, 36 different ports. Those ports, interestingly, represent 34% of automotive and automotive parts imports into the United States.
Wow.
I mean, this is really, really significant. It will impact the entire supply chain. The European importers more than others, but this is a really significant issue. And every day that this goes on, it does create bottlenecks. And we saw with COVID, for example, the plants didn't shut down for 18 or 24 months. The plants might have shut down for 60 or 90 days, but it took 18 or 24 months to kind of put all of those things back together again. So really, really significant. Will impact, of course, some OEMs more than others, but not a small thing. It's also going to put at risk, again, this inflation story that you just mentioned. So right now we're talking about headline inflation at 2.5%. That's phenomenal. We're coming very much the right direction. But these kinds of things drive up, delays, they drive up expense, and there could be inflationary pressures that come with this, which then influences the Fed's ability to continue to bring down rates, which for our industry is really important.
That's right. Should we be talking more about China? I mean, why is the U.S. government doubling down on tariffs on Chinese autos? We don't really see Chinese cars in the U.S.
It's It's a great question, and you just for example, in 2 weeks ago, the Biden administration kind of formalized some things that had been put in place, but they're now permanently in place or formally in place until they're pulled back, and that's 100% tariff on Chinese EVs, very substantial tariffs on auto parts, semiconductors, etc. And to your point, I haven't seen a Chinese car driving around the United States. Where's this coming from?
No.
But I don't know if you have Michael Dunn on CBT News. He's one of just a phenomenal commentator on the Chinese automotive industry, and his recent reports, they're always well done, but the most recent ones have been super relevant, and he's characterized as the Chinese blitzkrieg. In 2020, just a couple of years ago, China was exporting 1 million cars a year. In 2024, they're supposed to exceed 6 million cars a year.
Whoa.
And will be the largest exporting nation in the world. So
wow.
This is not a minor thing. This is not just sort of companies getting some share. I mean, this is the world's second biggest economy that is absolutely pushing extraordinary amounts of vehicles into the world, hoping to just frankly overwhelm markets, get to the point where whatever local market competition exists just is obliterated by very good, very cheap products, and in some cases, probably very good products. So a huge push on that. We are not ready for that as a country. We just aren't. And so as much as I think a lot of folks, both in both parties and a lot of us in the business world are generally open to, more trade versus less trade, the U.S. is just not ready for this. It'll be very significant. And so nevertheless, there's also then the issue of quote unquote fairness and subsidies. And we do know that, for example, the Chinese auto manufacturers and specifically the Chinese battery companies are being massively subsidized by the Chinese government, which gives them a big cost advantage. And the goal is to replicate what they've done in other sectors like steel, for example. They became by far the most competitive in steel, and they dominate the world now in producing steel. And so we just want to make sure we don't just give up on our automotive industries in Europe and the United States because we are not prepared for this. So big tariffs. Again, using our friend Michael Dunn's characterization, this is a blitzkrieg to take over market by market and position China as being the undisputed leader in next generation vehicles and specifically EVs.
And then of course, in terms of these EVs, we're worried about Chinese EVs, but what about EV adoption continues to really falter in the US and Europe, right?
Yeah, a bit of an irony that we do legitimately have a national concern about EVs coming in from China, and yet we're still seeing adoption quite low here in the U.S. Absolutely stagnant in the U.S. The most recent report out of Europe, for example, was that we have the August full numbers, lost a full market share, a point of market share in Europe. And so continuing to struggle with this adoption. Now, one positive is that, for example, in Q3, year over year, General Motors announced a 46% increase in EVs. So they're getting them out there. But it's exactly what you and I've talked about in the past. EVs are going to grow a little bit right now just because the product pipeline is so robust. I mean, they're just coming out of the plants. They got to move them. Whether it's profitable or not is a separate issue. So you are going to see support for the EV market and EV numbers just because General Motors and many others have got a lot of beautiful new products that are coming out. But in terms of like true adoption and really kind of taking over market share in a meaningful way, it's just not happening.
Stellantis has been in the news recently. And I've interviewed, as you know, a number of Stellantis dealers, some that are standalone, Stellantis dealers, and some that are large, 50 stores in the chain, and they've got 3 or 4 or 5 Stellantis stores, but they've got the other brands to offset it. But boy, I'll tell you that across the board, hands down, Stellantis dealers are just not happy. And for a multitude of reasons, and that franchise, as you and I have spoken about before, seems to be, in some hot water right now. So give us your take on that. What, it's been in the news. Now they're throwing it out there that they're searching for a new CEO, but he or she wouldn't take over until maybe 2026. Where's that all stand?
Yeah, so open secret in the industry that clearly Stellantis is really struggling, particularly in North America. I will say that now they've had to put out some profit warnings, so this is starting to change. But To the credit of the European-based parent, they have been able to really take a lot of cost out of the system, and the parent's been remarkably profitable in recent quarters. I think that's starting to change. They put out some profit warnings, but it's a little bit different story than what's going on specifically in North America.
Yeah.
In North America, and I can empathize with all the Stellantis dealers who are listening to this because they're living it, and that is, too much inventory, the wrong inventory. As I mentioned with you before, Stellantis over the last 5 years has increased average selling price or tried to increase average selling price more aggressively than any other OEM.
Yeah, no
Really,
question.
really challenging.
Right.
In the last quarter, the stat that I believe that I saw is that Stellantis sales in the last quarter were down 17% year over year. That's a big correction.
Yeah, it's huge.
So really big issue. Stellantis, the dealers have been telling us for the last number of months that Stellantis has been very, very slow to respond, and they believe that the combination of the most senior people being in Europe, not understanding this market nearly as well, and then just the tremendous amount of turnover amongst Stellantis executives, and they've been very slow to respond. They are now putting some incentives out there. I would say that on the margin, inventories, I think that sort of the problem has hit rock bottom. I think there's now kind of an unwind and starting to sort of work out of it. But as I can't remember if I mentioned this last time we chatted, I don't think that I did, but I had a Stellantis dealer ask me recently about how do you when you're selling your store and you've got inventories, and we kind of just talked generally about that. He said, what if I've got some cars from last year? And I said, well, we work it out. It's a few cars. And he said, no, I've got over 300 2023s. And this in the last 4 weeks. This was call it maybe August, early September. Like,
damn.
whoa. Well, that's a different issue.
That is a totally different issue. You didn't expect anything in the hundreds. You're like, hey, are there some demos left over? Some program cars or something?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So that caught me by surprise. That was certainly the most extreme that I'd heard.
Wow.
Coming out of time, I said, you've got 2025s arriving on the lot. And he said, absolutely, I have 2025s coming out of the lot. So I'd like to think that we've hit rock bottom, that folks are working their way out of this. Stellantis, again, they've got big operations in Europe. North America is an incredibly important market to them, but their senior executives do not know this market, and they have not won back the trust of the dealer body yet. They've got a lot of work to do.
One last question here, and I appreciate all the time that you've given us here. This has been fantastic, but I think it's a great show, and I know that dealers watching will agree. But give us an update on the buy-sell market.
Yeah, happy to do it. Flight to quality. I tell you, things are still getting done, and for solid operations, it's a very solid buy-sell market. Interestingly, notwithstanding all of the kinds of things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But there's no question it's a flight to quality. We, for example, a client that recently signed up. They have maintained profitability from COVID through today. Very strong franchises, very well run. We'll probably be in the market with them here in the fourth quarter of this year, and really strong. Just incredibly strong, and we will be well within the stated multiples that we publish, and we may well be able to go beyond that. Very, very well run. A large platform of domestic stores in the Southeast, for example, just really well run. Not the highest multiple franchises, but just phenomenal operators. They have COVID-like earnings, down a little bit, but not materially.
Wow.
I think there's still very robust demand for those things. So for some, it was the right place and the right brand, and for others, it was just very attuned operators that were able to shift so what's going on in the marketplace, and there's a very robust demand for those stores. There are others, of course, where you're looking at massive changes in profitability, profits down 60, 70, 80% over where they were 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But those are a lot tougher to do, and sure. We'll see how that plays out. But flight to quality on M&A activity, and the market is strong for stuff that's perceived as quality and stable. And
that's great. There's probably a few dealers that listen to today's report from you, and you mentioned China a few times, and they're going, maybe now's the time to sell. It's
going to be the next global fight, for sure.
Yeah.
And the U.S. will be will be a little bit sheltered and a little bit immune.
Yeah.
But it's a global marketplace, and we'll never be completely immune to what's going on. So we may not see it in the next few quarters, but in 2025 and 2026, this is going to be a really, really big issue, and maybe we follow up with the show that we just had mentioned and talk more detail about that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Ryan Kerrigan, Managing Director of Kerrigan Advisors. Thank you so much for stopping by. I love the update that you give us. It's just spot on, and I appreciate it very much. I know that our viewers will get a lot out of it, so thanks.
Of course. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.